Hey everyone, it's Scott from Scott's RPG Reviews. Been about a week since I've done any reviews, and I got in something really cool today, or yesterday I got it, so yeah, I got it on Saturday. I got Zweihander, the box set, the starter box, and I'm going to talk about this game and what I think of it. I'm going to do it in a couple of ways. I'm going to talk about the contents first, like I always do. Then I'm going to turn around and talk about the genre and what it's like and what I think of it. Then I'll talk about the game mechanics and how they work, and then I want to add something on the end because I think this is, for a modern context, a bit unusual. Is the character creation process. So let's start by talking about the box. The box is actually pretty heavy when you bring it. It's pretty standard size. The quality of the box is nice and solid. Very similar to like the Free League Publishing box styles, nice and solid, something you can put on a shelf and it's going to fit well. Better than what you see with, say, some other games. Then what does it come with? First thing it comes with is a player's guide. Looks like this. It is soft cover, not to be unexpected, running in at about 100 pages. Pretty good quality. Pages are not that shiny white, but a nice beige white. Staple bound, reasonably good. And then you have the Game Master's Guide, which is like this. Same idea. It is, again, looks like it's coming in at about 93, 94 pages. Some stuff on the back on combat conditions, a nice table of contents, pretty well structured. I'll go into more details about the contents of these books a little bit later on when I talk about mechanics. Okay, so those are the two books. Pretty much what you'd expect out of any RPG box set. They almost always come with a player's guide of some kind and then a GM's guide. Then you have character sheets. These are character sheets. Character sheets here are pretty long. They are 4 pages long. They've got one for each class of characters. So you have investigator, jester, so on and so forth. Nice printed paper, something that you could write on with. It's not glossy, which is good. You can write on this with pencil. Got lots of information. Pretty useful. And when we get into character creation, we'll talk more about these as well. So we got those. We've got a poster right here. I'm not going to open up the poster, but you got a poster. You've got damage and peril trackers. These actually go on your character sheet, so you can track damage and peril. You have a ton of maps. Here's a map. You've got layouts for various locations. Wow, a bunch of them. And what I thought was kind of interesting for a change was a GM screen. Normally GM screens come separately. They don't come into starter boxes. This actually comes with not a fancy GM screen by any stretch of the imagination, but it does come with a GM screen, which I thought was pretty cool. It comes with a set of dice. This one uses 10-sided dice, 10-sided dice, and 6-sided dice. It gives you 4 6-sided dice, 3 10-sided dice. Pretty standard dice, some nice pretty on them. Pretty functional. Something different you do see this in Dune, but I hadn't seen it in others, is we have a bunch of cards. We have spell cards. We have injury cards of various types. We have clue cards, which I thought were kind of neat. And you have what they call fortune tokens, which is like if you played any of the Modifius games which use momentum, it's like that. Or if you've played any of the Monte Cook Cipher System games, they use intrusions. It's mechanics are all slightly different, obviously, but kind of the same concept. It's basically the ways for players and GMs to affect things. Their mechanics for these fortune are really interesting. So that's that. That's the contents of the box. What do I think of these contents? I think it's really solid. Are the books the same quality as what I've seen, say, with Blade Runner and Alien and the Free League Publishing games? No. Are they better than what I've seen with, say, the Monte Cook games and some of the D&D stuff? I think it's better than that. So I think it's a nice middle of the road. It was affordable. I got it on eBay for $30. And that was for a new copy. That's pretty good pricing. For something like that. The Free League Publishing ones, people complain about, well, yeah, it's really nice components and it's really expensive. I said, yeah, but you're getting really cool stuff. So, from a component standpoint, I think this is a really solid RPG box. Now, let's let's talk a little bit about the genre. This game describes itself as fantasy horror. It's not that classic medieval fantasy because you do have firearms, which is not very typical for fantasy RPGs. It runs a little bit later. I would say we're talking, if you want to think about a historical period, I think we're Regency era, kind of late 1700s, early 1800s. They don't put a date on it, but I look at the stuff that's there and the way it falls. It kind of feels in that era. The game is very dark and grim, which you'd expect out of a horror campaign. But as they point out to start with, is that this is not an RPG about 0 to hero. This is an RPG about 0 to 1. This is an RPG where survival is key. The characters are normal human beings with, obviously, some rare elements of magic in it. So it's very grim, very dark, some pretty adult themes even in their starter box, I thought. Maybe a little bit too adult, don't know. It depends upon your thoughts. I liked it, but I can see where I would not play this with a little kid. But it's very dark and grim, and it's a can the characters survive kind of thing. Kind of like, I was thinking about this now, Alien on Free League Publishing is kind of the same way. New York Bork, which I haven't played yet, but I've read, feels like that kind of can the characters survive. It has a lot in terms of flavor, feels similar to New York Bork in a very different time frame. So it's an interesting genre. It's unusual. I'm a big fan of horror. I'm a big fan of non-modern horror. So I'm a big fan of Western, which is 18th century Northern European horror. I used to be a big player of Chill. Now Chill is modern horror. So I'm a big fan of horror games. I think they can be very interesting and fun depending upon what you're looking for. I wouldn't say this is a game that has a lot of humor to it. So if you're looking for a game that's kind of funny and fun, this is definitely not the game I would look for. I'd look somewhere else. The characters here, if you compare this to Western, the Western characters feel very aristocratic. They live in your party lives in a castle. You tend to have more kind of uplifting profession down. In this game, you tend to have more kind of, I'd say peasant level, but more labor class level characters for the most part. So more dark and grim, survival oriented, in the streets kind of horror is the way I would describe it. Really interesting genre. I really like it. Next one, let's talk about basic mechanics. The mechanics here are actually pretty straightforward. So everything's either run on a D6 for damage. High is good. The higher you roll is good. Skill checks and combat checks are done with percentile dice. You take that classic stat plus a skill level, add those, that gives you a target number. Here you have to roll below it. So like if I have a stat in, say, agility 50, and I'm doing say swimming, an agility skill, and I've got a skill of 2, which gives me 20 points, that'd be 70. I have to roll 70 or less to be successful. There's some really interesting things about the way the mechanic works. They have automatic successes and failures. Hundreds are always automatic successes. Ones are always automatic critical failures. Excuse my nose is itchy today. Which is pretty standard. They have a new thing which I hadn't seen before. It's probably in some other system I haven't seen yet, called flipping the dice. And it's not what you think it is. It's not like taking a 1 and turning it into a 10. What it is say you're rolling 2 10-sided dice for percentiles. Normally you'd say, this is the 10s and this is the 1s, and you'd roll the die. There's flip the dice positive, flip the dice negative, and there are different features for each of these. If you have flip the dice positive, you roll the 2 dice, and you get to pick which one, which you want to be the lower one, is the 10s and which one is the 1s. So you get to roll the 2 dice and then get the best result on those 2. If you're flipping negative, you do the same thing, but you get the worst result. There are also some cases where you get to roll 3 dice and pick the best of the 3 or the worst of the 3. So this concept of adding 1 die, that's not uncommon. the flipping the dice I thought was kind of a really interesting mechanic. That gives you some additional flavor. In addition to the standard mechanics, there is a magical system. There are actually very few classes. There are a bunch of classes, even in the basic box. They're relatively rare, and the skills are, and the spells are, you get 3 spells to start, and 2 come from a general pool, and 1 comes from your class. And you use the spell cards, and they require reagents. Some reagents you keep reusing, some you get, so... there is spells. It's got a good spell system, but it's very clear that magic is a component. Excuse me, Alexa, stop. Is a good component for this game, but is a component of this game in this genre, but it's not a huge, overwhelming one. There are other games. I mean, it's certainly not something as overwhelming like, say, D&D or classic medieval fantasy, or something where magic is heavily a heavy part of the game. Magic is kind of these really lightweight, I wouldn't say lightweight, but very less stressed parts of the game. So those are the mechanics. You have standard checks and you have opposition checks. Typically happens when someone's trying to oppose you, when you're engaged in combat, so on and so forth. So, solid mechanics. The 6-sided die higher versus the percentile dice being lower, wanting them to be lower. It wasn't confusing to me. It is a little strange. So that just be aware that sometimes you want high numbers, sometimes you want low numbers. Okay, so that's what I call the standard review and what I talk about. Now let's talk about character creation, because this is really, really important. And by the way, this is what they suggest. They do say you can do this, what they call the pick method, but they suggest you do, particularly the first time out, you do what we call the random method. As I've been collecting, in addition to getting these new games, I'm collecting some legacy games, because they're games from when I was a teenager or in college. I like them. Not so much I'm particularly inclined to play them, because they do definitely show their age, but because I like them for purposes of, well, let me kind of have some nostalgia about my past, for lack of a better phrase. And one of the games I've been collecting stuff on is Traveler, the original GDW, Games Design Workshop GDW, Games Design Workshop Traveler. It came in 3 core books, then they had a 4th and a 5th book, and then they ended up with about 20 or 30 books. And they were small books. They were 5x7 or 6x8 or 5x7 print. Most of them were about 20 to 25 pages long. I don't want to go too much into that. The Traveler character creation process, I tell people, one of the reasons no one will ever play that version of Traveler again is the character creation process is its own game, for lack of a better phrase. There's a lot of dice rolling, there's a lot of tables, there's a lot that goes into the character creation process. And characters are not totally random in that game, because you get to pick, you start by picking out what branch of service you're going to go into. You always assert in terms of military service. And you get choices along the way, but there's a lot of dice rolling and randomness to it. But the original D&D, when it came out, it was a roll 3 dice, 6, and assign them to your stats. Also very random, the first edition. We used to play roll 4 dice, take the top 3, generate 7 stats, or however many it was, and then you get to assign. Made for better character creation. Here, character creation is entirely random, from beginning to end. Other than your name, there really aren't any choices. So you roll a dice and you set your class. And then when your class is set, it sets your core skills. And you roll a dice and you set your age. And you roll a dice and you set your social status. And you literally, when you look at the player guide, there's probably 50 pages of dice rolling, it feels like. It's probably not quite that many, but there's a lot of dice rolling and looking on tables. About the only thing... Actually, no, even... items aren't random, but it's based upon class. So you don't get a lot of choices when you build your character. It's all about dice rolling and ending up with what you start with. The reason why... So I have very mixed feelings, because that means that you could have a character that you just really don't want to play, or you could have a character that is badly suited, or that just doesn't seem to match well, or whatever. They couch this when they talk about this, because they do try to address this, and the authors do, is saying, we're trying to create desperate characters. We're not trying to create these heroic characters that everything's perfect about the character and the stats are perfect and it's exactly what I want. They want these truly kind of random slice of life characters, and that's what they want in the genre. I get it. But, and you can certainly, once you get the rules set and you read them, say, you know what, I don't like this dice rolling. I'm going to just let people pick from tables. You could now, you want to make sure that people don't go crazy and say, oh, well, everybody's going to be an aristocrat and everybody's going to be this. And so, because you can min-max. You can min-max characters that way. This avoids that whole min-max situation. That's not the way the game was designed, but they do suggest you can do that if you want to. I haven't played yet, so I don't know how I feel about it. I did go through a character creation process. It took me about an hour on my own to create a character, so it's not that painful. A lot of it references stuff on the character sheet. So it says, go pull up the character sheet for this class, and it gives you most of the stuff there. That was good. So I don't know how I feel about it, but you do want to be aware, particularly if you're a modern RPGer that comes from a game where you get a lot of choices about how your character is designed. That's not this game if you play it by the rules. This is about, we're going to toss you a random character, and you're going to have to figure out how to make that character effective inside a game. Now, the way the tables are set and the way the choices are made, you don't end up with something completely nonsensical. Because when you pick your class, it says these are the spells you're going to take, and here's the reagents you're going to take, and here's the items you're going to take, and here's your core skills. So it's not completely random, so you end up with something stupid like, oh, look, I've got a mage who's got a skill in sword fighting. No, you don't have that. The characters do tend to make a little bit of sense, but you don't get that choice. So just be aware. And make your players aware. Now, if you're a GM, if I were a GM and I were running this game, I would do a bunch of pre-gens and say, we're going to play with pre-gens. That avoids that feeling of hopelessness because you say, okay, here's 10 pre-gen characters. Pick one that seems to suit your needs. There you go. Problem solved. If you're running in a campaign, people want to create their own characters, then you're going to have to talk to them and say, okay, we got a couple of options here. We can run by the official rules, means you get a random character, or we can do this other thing where you actually pick everything. That's the game in a nutshell. Ultimately, what do I think? The mechanics, other than the flip mechanic, well, first of all, components. Components are great. It's right in the middle of the road. It's the box isn't expensive. It does point out that, for good, that all the rules in this core book, this starter box, are compatible with the full actual hardbound edition. It says everything that's in here is essentially the same. There's one name change that they did for something. It starts with a D. I can't remember what it is. Doesn't matter. They did one name change, but everything's compatible. Perfectly fine. In fact, great. The prices, and is it a good price point? I love the Free League publishing boxes. Everybody knows that if you've watched my videos. They are expensive, but I think the quality is so good. But for some people, it's a price point they can't tolerate for a game they're not sure about. And it's not so cheap that the box is falling apart. I hate it when I buy a starter box and I open up the box and I'm like, oh, well, now that I open the box is effectively worthless. I'm going to have to figure out some other way to store this stuff. There are a number of different, particularly bigger publishers that do that. And I get why they do it. It's all about how can we make these cost effective to start. But it's annoying. And it would be really annoying with this box, given you've got large stocks of cards, you've got all these maps, you've got all this stuff. Starter boxes honestly need, and I know it's a soapbox for me, starter boxes need to be solid so that I can just put it on the shelf, and if I want to run this, I can just grab it and go. Genre, really interesting genre. Definitely not something you see a lot of before. There are some things that are similar, like New York Bork, and some other. And New York Bork is still very different, and really, it's just a strange game. It's not standard horror. It's not standard fantasy. I definitely like the genre. I'm going to get a couple of the adventures and campaigns and read those and see what they look like. And by the way, I have ordered, to give you a feeling, I will give you a little hint. I have ordered the Player's Handbook and the GM book. It means I like the system enough to go further and throw about $100 at it. So genre is good. Rules are pretty standard. Nothing earth-shattering except for the flip the dice mechanic. I think was kind of interesting. The fortune mechanic is somewhat different than the momentum or threat mechanics you'll see in other ones. Basically, it's kind of cool. You start with 2 bowls on the table, one which is for the players and one which is for the GM. And you, based upon a series of dice rolls again, you put certain numbers of tokens in each of the bowls. When the GM wants to do some kind of intrusion-like thing and make things harder or whatever, they spend one of the tokens. And when the GM spends a token, it goes in the player's bowl. And the players can do things like re-roll, take skills, stuff like that. Then they take one of those tokens and put it over into the GM's bowl. So these tokens are constantly flipping from one bowl to the next, showing your kind of power. There's also, I didn't mention this before, there's a whole corruption mechanic, which is very interesting. Pretty common in horror, by the way. It's not particularly unusual. So, mechanics, solid mechanics, pretty straightforward, pretty simple, other than the flip, which I talked about, and the high versus low, but that honestly not a big deal with time. As even there in their rule set, they say the mechanics for the system are easy to learn and difficult to master, particularly combat. By the way, time frames in this book, when they talk about it, you have the types of way you break up time are different based upon what you're doing. Pretty standard round stuff when you're in combat. They have scene stuff when you get into larger periods of time. Nothing big a surprise there. Character creation. I don't know. I have very mixed feelings about this character creation process. And I came from the day of really random characters. I came from the day of Traveler and Gamma World and First Edition D&D, the old original box set, and then Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, now called First Edition. Tunnels and Trolls, also a very random system. This may be a bit too random for my likes. I'm going to have to play a game or two and see what I think about. Ultimately, I think my players, while they do tend to lean, some of them, towards what I call that min-maxing. Oh, let's build the coolest character I can build. Most of them build characters based upon concepts, and that's because I run a lot of Cypher System, Numenera games where you build based upon character concept. So I think giving them the option gives them more, instead of thrusting them into the, here's a really interesting, random, weird character that you've got. So, because people like to play fighters. Well, I roll the dice and I don't get a fighter. I've got a magic user, or I get a thief, or I get a smuggler, or whatever. I think I'll try the tables. I think if I play this multiple times in a campaign, I'll probably ultimately end up letting them pick. Okay, it's been long. This was a long one. Good. It looks like to be a solid game. It's probably, I've been looking at this for a while. I keep on hearing about it. And I said, well, let me see what it looks like. The other thing, last thing, and I know I'm getting off topic, is I think these cards are really cool. The clue cards, the spell cards are cool. The spell system is cool. No big surprise there. It looks to be solid. I heard good things about it. There are people that really like it. It's going to be one that I'm going to put in my stack and run when I get a chance. I'll probably run a one-off and see what people think. That's it for this week's review. We will